The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The primary race continued yesterday. We had some elections yesterday, Tuesday, March 22nd. We had 3 on the Democratic side, 2 on the Republican side. On the Republican side, it was Arizona and Utah. Donald Trump winning in Arizona with 47% of the vote. Ted Cruz, second place. John Kasich in third place. That was winner take all. Donald Trump securing all of the available delegates. In Utah, Donald Trump losing badly. Utah seems to really not like Donald Trump or John Kasich. We had a huge win for Ted Cruz with 69% of the vote to only 14% for Trump and 17% for John Kasich. So how did the results yesterday in these two states compare with the polls that I told you about yesterday? Well, in Arizona, Donald Trump was polling plus 13, ended up winning by plus 22, overperforming the polls. And in Utah, Ted Cruz was winning by 24 and ended up winning by more than twice that margin, by 52 points. So it seems, Lewis, that the pattern is voters are coalescing around the leaders in many of these states. Trump pulling out a bigger win than the poll suggested, but Ted Cruz also pulling off a bigger win than the poll suggested. And maybe this is the dynamic that is developing later on in this primary process.
Maybe, but Donald Trump had the winner-take-all state, right?
They were both winner-take-all.
Or were they both? Okay. Well, I think Donald Trump is still the guy here so far.
Still the
I don't
leader.
see that changing. At this point, can't we just say Donald Trump will be the nominee, assuming the establishment doesn't decide to not give him the nomination?
We can't say that, and I'll tell you exactly why. Let's start with yesterday's delegate numbers. You will notice that yesterday, here is where we are right now. Pre-yesterday's elections, yesterday's primaries, Donald Trump had 683 delegates, and Ted Cruz had 421. Yesterday, Donald Trump picked up 58 in Arizona, while Ted Cruz picked up 40 in Utah. You will notice Kasich picked up 0. This gives us a running total of Trump 741 and Cruz 461. So yes, Lewis is correct that after yesterday's elections, Donald Trump gained 18 delegates in his lead over Ted Cruz. However, here is the important thing. A new 538 piece, Nate Silver's 538, put together sort of the consensus predictions for how Donald Trump will do in the remaining primaries, starting April 5th and going all the way until I believe it is June 7th. The consensus, an average of the expectations for Donald Trump, are that he will pick up 449 additional delegates from here until the end of the primaries. That would put his total at 1190. That would not get him the nomination. Statistically speaking, the average of the expected Donald Trump delegate acquisition between now and the end of the primaries, Lewis, is that Trump will not have enough delegates to secure the nomination before the convention. Now, he will be pretty close, realistically, unless something drastic changes in favor of one of the other candidates. Donald Trump will be very, very close to securing the nomination at the time of the convention, and then all bets are sort of off.
Or if 538 is wrong.
Or 538 could be wrong. Yeah.
They've changed their mind on a few things already.
They have.
So maybe we shouldn't be putting all our eggs in the 538 basket.
No, we shouldn't. But again, this is an analysis that 538 did by taking an average of what a variety of polling experts think. So this isn't the opinion of 538. They've simply assembled this analysis. This also all depends on John Kasich staying in. If John Kasich leaves this race, it could change the race in a couple of different ways, and it's anyone's guess exactly what that would be. Next up, Wisconsin on April 5th, and you know we will continue following it. Now, what about the Democratic side? What happened on what has been dubbed Western Tuesday on the Democratic primary side? Here are the results from yesterday's 3 primary elections. In Arizona, Hillary Clinton defeated Bernie Sanders 58-40. All right. Well, what about the other 2 states? In Idaho, Bernie Sanders with a huge win over Hillary Clinton, basically a 4-1 margin, 78-21. And then literally a 4-1 margin in Utah, where Bernie Sanders also defeated Hillary Clinton 80-20. Wow. How did yesterday's results compare with the polls we discussed? Well, in Arizona, Hillary Clinton was leading by 30. She ended up winning by only 18. In Idaho, Bernie Sanders was winning by 2. He ended up winning by 57. And in Utah, Bernie Sanders was winning by 8 in the polls, albeit pretty old poll. And he ended up winning by 60. So the trend, Lewis, on Western Tuesday was that in all 3 primaries, Bernie Sanders overperformed the polls. Hard to deny that, right? I mean, that's just an empirical reality.
Bernie did outperformed the polls by a higher margin than he has in any other primary, I believe, right? In these 2 instances.
However, the most important question is what happened to the delegate count. The picture is not quite so pretty for Bernie Sanders. You will notice before going into yesterday's primary elections, Hillary Clinton, 1170 delegates, Bernie Sanders, 854. In Arizona, Hillary Clinton picked up 46 delegates to Bernie's 23. And though Bernie Sanders had overwhelming wins in Idaho and Utah, the number of delegates up for grabs in those states was not as high as the number in Arizona. So in total, yesterday, Hillary Clinton picked up 59 delegates and Bernie Sanders picked up 58. So although Bernie Sanders did drastically overperform the polls, particularly in Idaho and Utah, he fell behind. He has lost 1 delegate to Hillary Clinton. This is a mathematical reality. I know a lot of people don't like it, but this is it. Bernie Sanders does need to start winning some of the big states by a 2-1 margin, 70-30, 75-25, to start making up ground. We have Alaska, Hawaii, and Washington State on Saturday. 172 delegates at stake there. We will continue covering it, and we will tell you exactly where the candidates stand. Right-wingers have become completely unhinged, and they have started blaming the Brussels attacks. And I'm not talking about Brussels, Massachusetts, which I don't believe exists. I'm talking about Brussels, Belgium, right? Not in the United States. Right-wingers are blaming the Brussels attacks on President Obama being in Cuba at the time of those attacks. Of course, President Obama visiting Cuba, the first time a president has visited Cuba in 88 years. We've talked about how this just makes perfect sense. It's time to stop the absurd double standard around Cuban relations. And now the horrible attack in Brussels yesterday, the Islamic terror attack in Brussels, has opened up the door for unhinged conservatives to criticize President Obama. Let's look at some tweets. First from Mark Thiessen, a former Bush speechwriter. Brussels under attack. Obama on a tourist trio in Havana with his family. Says it all. Here is right-winger Bo Snerdley's tweet where he said, in Cuba, Obama briefed on Brussels attacks. Oh, he's taking his briefings again? And then Richard Grenell, a former Mitt Romney advisor, tweeting, terrible optics. ISIS attacks Brussels, and Obama is with the Castro brothers in Cuba. A Trump supporter then tweeting the incredibly astute suggestion, meanwhile, Obama drinking mojitos in Cuba. Hashtag fail. Hashtag Trump 2016. And here's a tweet from a self-described conservative constitutionalist on Twitter. Brace yourselves. Has anyone seen Obama denounce the murders in Brussels this morning? Must still be reveling in the police state ambiance of Cuba. So President Obama should be criticized because a terrorist attack happened in Belgium while he was president, but somehow George W. Bush is immune to criticism because of that terrorist attack called 9/11 right here in the United States while he was president. Seems logically consistent to me, Lewis.
Any opportunity
Yeah.
to slam Obama. I'm surprised they didn't blame him for the bombings in Turkey,
Right,
and attacks by radical Islamist groups happening in Africa, like Boko Haram. What was Obama doing then?
Yeah. Who will Republicans blame for everything when President Obama is out of office in 9 months? It will almost be a real big problem. The Republican Party is heading towards a real big implosion. At this point, if Trump wins, The Republican Party, as you know it, is over. Based on Trump's success in the primary so far, if the Republican Party pushes Trump out at the convention, it's still a horribly undemocratic, terrible optics situation for the Republican Party. And in addition, once President Obama is out of office, whether it's Trump or a different Republican in the White House, if a Republican does ultimately win the election in November, the Republicans lose someone to blame for absolutely everything that happens on this planet and probably out of it. If we were doing more stuff in outer space, a lot of that stuff would probably be blamed on Obama, too, if anything went wrong. The Republican Party is really going to be in a sort of quagmire here in terms of what to do and who to blame.
If we end up with another Democratic president, there will be plenty of blame to throw around for everything. And so if I were someone who takes to social media all day and slams the president.
Right, which you're not.
And of course, being a Republican.
Yeah.
I might want Hillary or Bernie to win just so I have something to do every day.
It almost might be better for Republicans for a Democrat to win because then they can avoid this entire debacle of whatever ultimately happens with Trump and the implosion of their party. And it'll be pretty easy to know who to blame for the next 4 or 8 years. Just blame the Democratic president. It's a far simpler path forward for Republicans if it's a Democrat who wins in November.
Well, that is true. Luckily, if it's a Republican president, they can always just blame
the
Democratic congressmen and women for,
right.
or blame Obama retroactively.
It's the lasting impact of President Obama and the minority Democratic lawmakers in the House and Senate that there will likely be. Send me your thoughts on this. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Robert Johnson. Robert, I can't thank you enough for being a David Pakman Show member, and I'll remind you, you too can be member of the day. Join Robert by signing up at davidpakman.com/membership, and for the next, 4.5 days, you can get a 33% discount on your membership and get a free David Pakman Show t-shirt while doing it. There is only one place where you can take advantage of that offer, and it's at davidpakman.com/spring16. Anybody who is an active member as of Monday, March 28th, no matter when you signed up, you will be entered to win one of 5 $80 wireless Bluetooth headphones from Thrive. They are the Elite XT headphones. We'll be doing a giveaway of 5 pairs on Monday. Sign up at davidpakman.com/spring16. Okay, this week's Hatriot Mail tackles an issue I love and am actually still confused about. But first, I'll remind you what we mean by Hatriot Mail.
Because it's God's divine plan that every child be born, but an act of patriotic duty to snuff that bastard if he sets a foot near your stuff. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
So this week's Hatriot Mail addresses an issue that is a source of much confusion and debate, Lewis, even to me. Am I white? I asked my dad the other day, are we white? He wasn't really sure. I'm still not sure. It's never clear. I am from Argentina, so I'm sort of Hispanic. But my ancestry is from Eastern Europe, so I'm sort of white. But as an Ashkenazi Jew from Eastern Europe, we certainly weren't considered white for a very, very long time. I don't know if I'm white. Here's a Hatriot Mail that seems to shed some light on this issue.
With Jews you lose, candidate is a good man. Better than you, David Pakman, who will lie at any turn. You acted as if you knew nothing about Jewish power in one interview you had. You know, believe me, and your time is coming too. Yeah, you can look more white than some, but trust me, I don't look at that as any meter to say you're better. Florida needs a guy like this. With Jews, you do lose.
Yeah. I don't know if it's with Jews you lose or with Jews you loose, as in like you are loose with Jews. I have no idea what that means. In any case, I think what is being suggested here is that although I don't know if he means I'm a more white-looking Hispanic person or a more white-looking Jew. I don't know what he's talking about, but I guess he's saying it's a trick that I look white. People should not fall for that.
Okay, sure. Well, I don't know what to say.
Can you make heads or tails out of this?
Not really. It's just more nonsensical Jew-hating patriotism,
Yeah.
and we really love to play it.
Someday I am going to figure out whether I'm a white man, and
Good luck to you.
I look forward to that day. I have devastating audio and transcripts from Donald Trump. In debates and in TV interviews, you often don't really put presidential candidates in a position to have to reveal whether they know what the hell is going on or have no clue whatsoever. The Washington Post editorial board had a 60 or 70-minute meeting with presidential candidate Donald Trump, and it was everything, absolutely everything we could imagine and wish for it to be. We have put together some of the best moments. We're going to play the audio, and if you're watching with us, you'll be able to read the transcript on screen. It's just so amazing, Lewis, as I watched and listened to this stuff. Trump has no clue what is going on. I mean, when he is asked to go into any level of depth, he knows nothing.
People are going to accuse us of cherry picking, and they can listen to the whole interview.
Yeah.
I promise you, when Trump is asked a follow-up question after you hear the answers that we're going to play,
It's worse.
it's worse. He never answers the questions because he can't answer the questions.
So let's start with the first one. Here is a conversation, an exchange involving Trump about what he would do to help improve a place like Baltimore, Maryland. Okay, let's start there.
So what would you do for Baltimore, let's say?
Well, number one, I'd create economic zones. I'd create incentives for companies to move in. I'd work on Spirit because the Spirit is so low. It's incredible. The unemployment is, you look at unemployment for black youth in this country is, African American youth is 58, 59%. It's unthinkable. Unemployment for African Americans, not youth, but African Americans is very high. And I would create in the inner cities, which is what I really do best. That's why when I open a building and I show you, it's way ahead of schedule, under budget and everything else. I know they did, I think it was the Rite Aid store. The store in Baltimore took them 20 years to get it built. One store in that.
What is he saying, Lewis? I mean, the question is, what would you do in Baltimore? The only suggestion he actually makes, right, when you see it on screen, he says, I would create economic zones. No one knows what that means, right? There's no elaboration of that. And then he just says, black youth unemployment is high, and it once took 20 years to build a Rite Aid in Baltimore. That's it. His plan is he would create economic zones. That's it.
That being said, this is the most nuanced and best answer he gives during the whole interview.
Right. It only gets worse from here. This is Trump's best answer during 69 or however many minutes this was, 67-minute meeting. Here's the next one, and here it really gets good. Does Trump see racial disparities in policing? Okay, let's take a look at that.
Do you see any racial disparities in law enforcement? I mean, what set it off was the Freddie Gray killing, as you know. Is that an issue that concerns
Well,
you?
look, I mean, I have to see what happens with the trial.
Well, forget Freddie Gray, but in general, do you believe there are disparities in law enforcement?
I've read where there are and I've read where there aren't. I mean, I've read both, and I have no opinion on that because, frankly, what I'm saying is, we have to create incentives for people to go back and to reinvigorate the areas and to put people to work. And we have lost millions and millions of jobs to China and other countries, and they've been taken out of this country. And when I say millions, it's tremendous. I've seen 5 million jobs. I've seen numbers that range from 6 million to smaller numbers, but it's many millions of jobs, and to countries all over. Mexico is really becoming the new China, and I have great issue with that because I use in speeches sometimes Ford and sometimes I use Carrier. It's all the same, whether it's Ford Carrier or Nabisco or any of the other companies. So many of the companies, they're moving to Mexico now, and we shouldn't be allowing that to happen.
So what he's saying, I guess the point he's making is, if there were more jobs in the U.S., you would have fewer people turning to crime. But that's not the question. The question is, are there racial disparities in policing here? And when you put this on paper, Lewis, when you put it in print and read his answer, China and Mexico are the focuses, the foci of his response about racial disparities in policing. And let me remind you, Trump's campaign gear, at least at one point, was made in China, and Trump's menswear line was made in Mexico. So he's choosing to give a non-answer about racial disparities by giving an answer that draws attention to the problems he's created. He's the guy who is sending work to Mexico and China. There is nothing here.
There's also, he can't say, even if his opinion is that these issues exist within law enforcement.
Right.
He's not going to say that because he knows
said
that
there
he can't
are,
say that.
But he kind of does say it, right? He says, I've read that there are, and I've read that there aren't, and I have no opinion at all.
That's the ultimate political answer.
Yeah.
And he just can't admit. I'm sure he knows what's happening. He just can't admit it because his supporters would go crazy.
Trump has also been talking about libel laws around journalism, and I think that the Washington Post did a great job of saying, well, what exactly would you do around libel laws? And again, here, just a total non-answer. The guy is on cloud nine.
My question is not so much why you feel they should be open, but how. What presidential powers and executive actions would you take to open up the libel laws?
Okay, look, I've had stories written about me by your newspaper and by others that are so false, that are written with such hatred. I'm not a bad person. I'm just doing my thing. I'm running. I want to do something that's good. It's not an easy thing to do. I had a nice life until I did this. This is a very difficult thing to do. In fact, I've always heard that if you're a very successful person, you can't run for office, and I can understand that. You'll do 100 deals, and you'll do one bad one or two bad ones. That's all they read about, are the bad ones. They don't read about the 150 great ones that you have. And even some of the ones they write that are good, they make them sound bad. So I've always heard that. I've heard that if you're successful, very successful, you just can't run.
Just about every answer from Trump in this interview is just referencing things he's heard. Hey, he's heard about racial disparities in policing, and he's heard about non-racial disparities in policing. He's heard it's tough to run for president. He's heard that even if you do 150 good deals, that the media will focus on the bad deals. Just nothing. It's devoid of any value whatsoever here.
That's what he says about everything.
Yeah.
He says, I've heard that this protester at my rally has connections to ISIS.
Right.
I've read this. People have said this. People have said that. That's what he says about just about any topic.
And then lastly, the cherry on top, just the most obvious non-answer I've ever seen when asked about whether he would deploy certain types of weapons against ISIS.
You mentioned a few minutes earlier here. You mentioned a few minutes earlier here you would knock out ISIS, and you've mentioned that many times. You've also mentioned the risk of putting American troops in a danger area. If you could substantially reduce the risk of harm to ground troops, would you use a battlefield nuclear weapon to take out ISIS?
I don't want to start the process of nuclear. Remember, one thing that everybody has said, I'm a counterpuncher. Rubio hit me, Bush hit me. When I said low energy, he's a low energy individual. He hit me first.
Yeah.
By the way, spent $18 million worth of negative ads on me. That's pitting.
No, but this was about ISIS.
Right.
You would not use
By the way,
a
could I do
tactical
one
nuclear
thing?
weapon against ISIS.
This is a very good-looking group of people. Could I just go around so I know who the hell I'm talking
Sure,
to? Is that
absolutely.
possible?
And I'd like to let a couple of them get in questions.
We get 5 minutes.
I'd love that.
Hard out.
Okay.
I love it. When there's only 5 minutes remaining in this entire thing and he gets to a question that he really doesn't want to answer, he says, I'd love to know who's talking to me here.
After an hour.
Now that we're 64 minutes in out of our 69 minutes that we've been allotted, now I'd love everybody to introduce themselves. I wish people would read this stuff in black and white and really see it for what it is, because it is devoid of meaning. There is nothing. This is someone whose head seems to be empty of any actual policy ideas and in-depth knowledge of anything, period. Fantastic job by the Washington Post. And by that, I mean, they just asked basic questions and asked for answers when there were none. And, we have to applaud that, no doubt about it. We will take a break. Give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Tim Mousseau, professor of biological sciences at the University of South Carolina. Tim, you've been researching the sort of longer-term impacts of radioactive contaminants. You've looked at populations of birds, you've looked at insects, you've also looked at people. What is your sense of what is most noticeably missing from sort of the average layman's understanding of the impact of radioactive contaminants?
Yeah, so right at this point in time, clearly there's this impression that's being transmitted by the popular media, the Disney Channel kind of thing, that maybe the plants and animals are thriving inside the Chernobyl zone because of the absence of hunting. There's a fence around the zone, and not many people are allowed in. And so what's being presented as this highly radioactive area is being sort of a wildlife refuge, an Eden for wildlife. And that's clearly not the case when you actually do the science and go count the animals.
And what's your sense of sort of the changes that can take place in populations over longer periods of time when exposed to radioactive contaminants? I think it's sort of much more commonly discussed acute radiation poisoning, etc. But over time, what changes can we see in human and animal populations?
No, that's a really good point. And that really kind of defines the difference between toxicology, which is really what a lot of the radiation studies have been in the past, and radioecology or ecological studies or evolutionary studies, which is what we're trying to do. It's very clear that when organisms are living in their natural environment, exposed to the wide range of other kinds of stressors that wild organisms have to face, things are very different. And this is particularly true when these organisms are faced with exposure to these contaminants generation after generation after generation. The effects of mutations, the direct effects of the radiation and the other contaminants in the area contribute together, work together to lead to dramatically larger impacts on these natural populations than sort of traditional toxicological studies would predict.
What does the current science tell us about the sort of sensitivity or susceptibility of different species to these types of elements? I mean, is the sense that all species on Earth are sort of equally impacted? Do we see differences? What species maybe are more resistant or less impacted?
Yeah, very good question. And it's very, very clear that there's a huge variability in the susceptibility or vulnerability of different species to these contaminants, but as well as individuals within the same species show tremendous variation in their vulnerability. Some of this is because of differences in diet. Some organisms tend to eat food that's on the ground where the highest levels of contamination is found. Some organisms like to eat mushrooms, for instance, and mushrooms are well known to concentrate radioactive cesium, and thus these organisms are getting a bigger dose. One of the things that we've observed by comparing our studies of Fukushima and Chernobyl is that the birds and the butterflies appear to be particularly vulnerable to the effects of contamination. We think this is because they share a kind of a unique genetic system for determining sex that makes the females particularly vulnerable, and this generates reduced population growth rates. But yeah, it's very clear that there's tremendous variation in sensitivity. We just published a paper last month, actually, that investigated all of the studies we could find for Chernobyl, where they looked at antioxidant levels in these organisms that are living there. They also looked at genetic damage or some proxy for genetic damage, as well as oxidative stress coming in from the radiation. And it was very clear that there were trade-offs in the consequences or trade-offs in the use of antioxidants to defend against the consequences of ionizing radiation. And that, we think, based on many of our other studies, this seems to play a major role in determining the vulnerability of individuals and different species.
So when we think about the animal kingdom, so to speak, is there any general rule we can apply to sort of give us a sense of how this works? So, for example, as a general thing, we know that larger species tend to live longer than smaller species of animal, but within each species, the smaller individual animals tend to live longer than the larger. So elephants live longer than flies, but small elephants live longer than large elephants. Is there some sort of broader rule that you could tell us about here on this?
Yeah, I'm not sure that rule applies universally. I don't think it applies to, for instance, insects, where there's usually a very good relationship between the age of the organism or how long it takes to reach sexual maturity and its size, unless the organism is unhealthy. And usually for most organisms, there's an optimal body size, that reflects long-term evolutionary selection for that particular size in a given environment. So again, I'm not sure if there's a general rule of thumb that applies in that circumstance.
Fair enough. So some of the work you do is not without controversy, and I'm sure there's no doubt in my mind you're aware of this, but there are those, you have critics who say that your work is really sort of a veil for an anti-nuclear energy sentiment, right? And it's a pretty clear and sort of easy to understand allegation, which is the work you're doing is really just a way to dissuade from the use of nuclear power. How do you respond to such an allegation?
Yeah, it's this comes simply from the fact that our findings tend to be tend to uncover never before seen consequences of this kind of stress, this radioactive stress. Yeah, I'm not an anti-nuclear activist. That's certainly not how I got into this business. I started and I continue to be an evolutionary ecologist or evolutionary geneticist. My interest is in how organisms adapt to changing environments. I used to work primarily on changes in seasonality, or what we might call climate change at this point, looking at the genetic basis of adaptation, looking at the genetic basis of behavior. Actually, when we first started our work in Chernobyl 16 years ago, we went there looking for the sorts of adaptations that plants and animals might employ to adjust to this kind of environment. We were actually thinking that there might be many kinds of adaptations. We'd read some of the literature coming out of the International Atomic Energy Agency and related panels, suggesting that the plants and animals were thriving, and the only way to kind of reconcile that observation with the known effects of radiation is that they must be adapting. And we've we've been looking very hard for adaptation in a wide variety of different organisms. We found some hints that some species may be adjusting their life cycle or adjusting their use of different antioxidants again in a way that allows them to survive better and reproduce better than they otherwise might be able to in the presence of radiation. But yeah, certainly our motivations are not at all related to any kind of anti-nuclear activism. In fact, I got into science because my best friend's father was a nuclear physicist at Los Alamos, and I thought at one time I might want to go down that path myself. Again, it's true that the activist community has taken a great interest in our work, but we would be equally thrilled if the nuclear regulatory community also was interested in our work.
So to be clear, just as one example, when you spoke at Physicians for Social Responsibility, that's a group that was founded by Helen Caldicott, who has said Chernobyl killed 1 million people. I've not been able to find what I would consider a sort of serious peer-reviewed study that says that. Even though you spoke there, you don't necessarily agree with every claim that individuals involved with that might make.
Absolutely correct. A number of years ago, I had to make a decision about who I would respond to, who I would speak to. Yeah. And I decided that, the only way I could do this as a scientist was to accept all invitations to speak. If somebody wants to know about the work we're doing, I have an obligation as a scientist and as a communicator to speak to them. And so as long as somebody's willing to pay my airfare to get to the meeting, I'm quite happy to speak to any group as long as it fits my schedule.
And I think that a lot of scientists we've interviewed sort of share that view. And I've asked them this, and I'm curious: do you have any sort of way to protect yourself, or is it even your responsibility, or do you care to protect your research from being used in ways that may be deceptive or misleading? I mean, as you say, you show up and speak and you say what you want, but what is your sort of reaction or concern with others misusing your research?
Yeah, so, again, the only way we can deal with this, the only way that we can, as scientists, really behave responsibly is to publish our science in the scientific literature, making use of the peer review process, and to limit, for the most part, what we say to the work that has been through that process. That's sort of the minimum expectation for contribution to the discussion. It has to be peer-reviewed scientific literature, and so this is what we focused on doing, conducting the research, but also publishing it as best we can, and making use of that as our starting point for the discussion. What we hope to do is to provide the data, the information for evidence-based science policy. Again, no matter what you think about nuclear energy, it's here with us to stay for a long time to come. And we have to deal with the issues, the environmental issues, the policy issues related to that technology, one way or another. I live here in South Carolina, and we have 4 new reactors being built as I speak within a stone's throw of where I live. And so, we need to have the best available information. What's clear to me is that there has been some attempt, either just passively or perhaps not so passively, to ignore some of the environmental consequences of nuclear accidents and other related activities. And I think if we're going to be continuing to use this type of energy, we need to have the answers to the environmental consequences.
All right, we've been speaking with Tim Mousseau, professor of biological sciences at the University of South Carolina. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thanks for calling.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Kansas state lawmakers have introduced some bills which would ban transgender students from using the restrooms that match their gender identity. One of the bills is called the Student Physical Privacy Act. It would apply not only to public schools, but public universities as well. It guarantees that anyone who sees someone transgender in the bathroom could sue their school for $2,500 every time it happens. It's like a bounty for spotting transgender people in bathrooms. And Louis, tell me, these are complementary bills, SB 513 and HB 2737. How exactly would you investigate whether there's a transgender individual in the bathroom? It sounds like in order to collect this $2,500 bounty, you've really got to do some pretty invasive checking, don't you?
You would probably, unless there are witnesses that want to assist you with this,
right,
need some type of video or picture evidence. How could you even prove that the person was in the bathroom? It's your word against their word.
Well, but and even beyond that, though,
right?
You go into the women's bathroom, right? The bathroom designated for women. It's all stalls. There's no urinals. There's someone in a stall. All you know is they are sitting on the toilet urinating, okay? And I apologize about the uncouth nature of this discussion, but this is where we are in modern-day America, at least Kansas. What do, right? I mean, it's an enclosed stall, and as far as you know, there's just someone in there. You hear a tinkle, Louis, and so how do you determine that there is someone in there that is biologically male? Do you rip the door down? Do you slam the door open? I mean, do you look under the stall? Do you climb over the stall? How exactly do you go about collecting and investigating these $2,500 bounties?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I suppose if I were forced to do that, I would look over the stall or ask them and see if they're willing to just give full disclosure about that. It's pretty despicable. It's nonsense because it can't be enforced. There will not be one bounty paid.
You don't think so? Oh, I'm worried that there will be many bounties paid, and I'm worried about how these investigations into the biological sex of an individual will be investigated. What we have to hope for, because this is really concerning, is that much like the South Dakota bill, which was vetoed by the governor, and Tennessee's bill, which died in committee earlier this week along these same lines, that these bills will not pass, because I genuinely am worried about what is going to be irreversible psychological damage to transgender individuals who are they're basically being hunted, right? Hey, I'm going to go in the bathroom, but if I'm spotted, if someone checks my genitals, that's $2,500 on the line that someone else stands to earn. Can you imagine walking around knowing that there's essentially a $2,500 bounty not on your head, but on your genitals?
It's outrageous. And who is the governor that ultimately decides here?
Well, I guess Sam Brownback could ultimately... Oh, I see what you're getting at. Yeah. Not good. Not good at all. Hey, it seems like we've done this story many times, but each time it is a new story with new data. Once again, prayer and belief in God in the United States have hit new lows. There's a new study released by San Diego State University, which looked at 60,000 respondents in general, in the general social survey between 1972 and 2014. And religiosity in the United States continues to decline. Americans are 5 times less likely to pray in 2014 than in the early 1980s, and about half as likely to say that they believe in God. The poll also found that Americans are less likely than ever to attend religious services. Not surprisingly, the 18 to 29-year-old age group of respondents is the least religious age group of all. And the key here is to understand, you know that thing about, people get more conservative as they get older. No, there's no evidence of that. What is true is that at any given time, the older generations are more conservative than the younger generations at that time. So we don't know for sure whether individuals who now are 40, but 15 years ago were in the 18 to 29 age bracket, have they become less religious as individuals, or is it merely that each subsequent younger generation is less religious throughout their lives? And that is sort of a different question, but the broader strokes of this are as we know them, Lewis, which is the country is becoming less and less religious. Interestingly, though, the numbers here are still way higher than in other industrialized countries. If you look at Sweden and Denmark, Norway, Hong Kong, Japan, the United Kingdom, and Finland and France, Australia, Netherlands, New Zealand, South Korea, et cetera, they have a far lower belief in God and prayer consistency or self-reported prayer than the United States. And that is also something really interesting socially, culturally, et cetera. And it is reflected in the politics of the country, no doubt.
Yes. So despite efforts by the proselytizers and by those radical groups like the Good News Club that we talked about, it isn't working. And I'm happy about that.
It's interesting, though, how in spite of this, it's still not a low enough level of religiosity. We're saying as a political candidate, I'm an atheist, stops being a political liability. The country is still religious enough.
That could take 40 years.
That is a political, and absolutely, when we look at the sort of generational changes, we're talking about, in many cases, 1% a year that we lose in terms of individuals describing themselves as religious, depending on how the question is asked and what specifically you're asking. So that is going to be a long path, but very interesting results from yet another study on religion. Send me your thoughts on what could accelerate the decline of religion in the United States, but also what could reinvigorate religion in the United States. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about that. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's an interesting little voicemail we received earlier today.
Hello, David. This is Tom Sanders in Illinois. I really appreciate the piece you did on the Good News Club. I found that extremely interesting and very informative. don't particularly like it when you guys start waxing on about when you're dating and who you're dating, what bar you're going to. I'm 58 years old. I could care less. But the information that I got from the Good News Club interview, I really appreciated and really can put to good use. Thank you very much.
It was a good interview.
It was.
But he did the thing.
I assume he means he could not care less, right?
A lot of people do that.
But I don't remember.
I couldn't care less.
I don't even remember talking about who we're dating and what bar we're going to. I don't know what segment that is.
Occasionally, you might say, I went here with my girlfriend, or we were at this restaurant or bar.
I see.
I guess he doesn't like that.
Well, we will do our best to accommodate all opinions on the program. Any other segments you want us to get rid of, just let me know. If you want Hatriot Mail to be gone or whatever, we'll scrap it all. We'll really strip the show down at the request of anybody who wants it. The only problem is we usually have conflicting demands placed on us for show segments, but we'll figure it out. On today's bonus show, Anonymous proves a point. 24 are dead from bad alcohol in Pakistan, and a creepy robot agrees to destroy all humans. Yeah, it's pretty creepy. We'll talk about all of those stories and more. Sign up for the bonus show and all member benefits at a 33% discount and get a free David Pakman Show t-shirt made from 100% recycled material, recycled fabric, by going to davidpakman.com/spring16. The t-shirts continue to go out. It's very, very exciting.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.